Bar for Bar album reviews. Marlon Craft, How We Intended. How We Intended is the second album from Hell's Kitchen rapper Marlon Craft. This album follows his amazing debut with Funhouse Mirrors and his Work From Home EP that dropped last year. This album was intended for release last year, or at least that was the plan originally. Throughout this project, we hear bits of how 2020 was going to be his year, but uncertainty struck with the pandemic, and here we are. With this project, Marlon brings in a very boom bap sound mixed in with heavy jazz influence and instrumentation that he and his guests just flow on so well. At times, it almost feels like a jam session with all the instruments and people just rapping their asses off, but that's great. The album starts off with 2020 intro, which says a lot. Like I mentioned, this project was intended for release in 2020, but here we are at the top of 2021. This is one of the best intros for an album I've heard in a long time. Here, Marlon raps for the entirety of the track, only letting it breathe a little bit during the bridge, where we get a bit of a beat break. Re-listening to the track while writing this review gave me chills as the beat came back on with the second verse. The song itself is really to let the listeners know that this, 2020, is his year, and he's not playing no fucking games either. There's nothing to really dislike here. Between the fantastic bass line to Marlon's flow and subject matter, it'll grab listeners for sure. Marlon carries this energy into the next track, Hoodie Weather. This song is a verbal bombardment against those who profit off of the cultures and people that are constantly terrorized by the powers that be, rather than supporting and uplifting them. This has been more prevalent in recent years, where many journalists, bloggers, and reporters have easier access to promote themselves and their work, which is often about the struggles of these minority communities. It's fine to write about these things and start a conversation about it. In fact, it's great to do so. But the issue Marlon has is that those people don't always really show support. Like, sometimes it's just like they write about these things and go about their day as if it's a non-issue. With Lot to Give, Marlon starts off his verse almost as a spoken word, with nearly every line starting off with lot of. The entirety of the first verse is just talking about how there's a lot of things that people do and feel. The chorus, I feel, does a really good job of explaining the first verse with him saying that he's given a lot. Here we see him blending the first and second verses really well, because where the first verse was more talking about others, the second is all about him. He's given a lot and wants to get the respect that he deserves from what he's given to the world. Offbeat changes things up a little bit, which makes a very appropriately named track now that I think about it. But it's honestly really straightforward, and I really enjoy it. With both verses here, we see Marlon realizing that this person in his life is what grounds him. There's a lot going on in his mind and a lot that he worries about, but he can always rely on this person to center him. This is actually really well placed in terms of sequencing, because with the first few tracks, they were so about him trying to prove himself and trying to give as much of himself as possible. But here, he's realizing that sometimes you just need to unwind. While unwinding, though, Marlon's been feeling grateful. This track is about him being grateful for all the people that have doubted him and how all the L's that he's taken have pushed him to become who he is and what he is today. Succeeding when others thought you'd fail is always a great feeling, especially when you can go back and just say, hey, thank you. This string of introspective songs continues with the track Tell Me Today, where Marlon's basically saying if you love him, tell him today. The first verse is a reminder that sometimes the negative things in life are actually important to acknowledge and serve a greater purpose other than to make you feel down. Without them, you wouldn't know what the good things are, and that sort of thing. We then get into the first of two interludes with Pay Attention Part 1. The purpose of this interlude is to let the listeners know where Marlon's head was at during the process of working on this album. He set out to make 2020 his year, but clearly the world had different plans. Even though he was still getting love from those around him, the uncertainty of 2020 greatly affected him. This interlude flows well into the next track, Wherever. The track is about Marlon wanting to get away from things. He wants to be in a positive space where he can flourish. I did a full breakdown of this track back when released in October, I believe it was, so check that out for a proper analysis of it. Get Off My Yard was the last single, I believe, for this project, and is one of the more fun songs here. This song directly attacks all y'all on the internet who just be hating to hate. There's not a whole lot to say about this track other than that, but it's definitely a fun song and has a different sound to it than what we've heard thus far on this project. With The Workin' Man, we get the first features on the project, and it's in the form of a crew cut, essentially. This track features Osmond Benjamin, Chris Rivers, Bobby Fino, and Radamiz. And when I say this is a crew cut, I mean it. This track is lyric heavy with a fairly short chorus to break up the verses, each of which are hella solid. When I first listened to this tape, I didn't take a look at the feature list, mostly because I expected them to be credited on the track listing. However, Tidal didn't show them, so I assumed that it was just a fully solo tape. I say all this just to say that I was blown away. This is my first time hearing most of these rappers except for Chris Rivers and Marlon, obviously. But everyone brought in dope bars and carried on the theme of the working man. Each of these guys are working men and have to do different things to survive and to get where they are today. Loyal features Katori Walker and is all about loyalty. Marlon puts in a lot of work and wants people to know that he's been loyal to where he came from and hasn't strayed away from it. But he's also talking about how his fan base is loyal to him. Katori brings in a slightly different perspective with his verse, where he acknowledges that there are plenty of people out there that only show fake love just for the attention. However, he does also have fans and homies that will ride for him, and for them, he'll remain loyal to his craft. Looking Up is one of my favorite songs on this album, and it features Mal's Monday. This track is about things looking up. It addresses a lot of the things that have been going on during the pandemic, ranging from people becoming alcoholics to the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd to the overall fuck the police mentality that many of us have. It's an interesting song because the verses are really serious, but the chorus is a bit more upbeat and hopeful. I guess that makes sense though, given the subject matter with things looking up. The album begins to wrap up with the track At the Door. This track is a lot more somber in nature and touches on a lot of the things that many face when growing up and working towards their success. There's many hard times, but he wouldn't white them out just because they're important to him. Having those dark times to look back on as you're progressing through your career, I'd argue, is important for everyone. It helps you remain humble, but also reminds you of where you came from and what you've done to get there. The final song of the album is In the End. This track is a really solid conclusion to the album because it brings in all the uncertainty that Marlon was facing throughout the project and shines a positive light on it. Everything that we experience and go through are just part of life, and it helps us grow. As we overcome these obstacles, we become more complete, at least in my mind. Obviously, times can get tough, but to have the perseverance to push through allows us to come out the other side ready to take on anything. The final track on this album is Pay Attention Part 2. This outro is good because it basically recaps everything that he said and all of his emotions that were on display with this album. Because in the end, it's only going to be as good as we intended. Overall, this album was a great listen. I've been a fan of Marlon since his debut album, and he has yet to disappoint. I can see a lot of people, though, not really liking this album because it sounds so rap when compared to other artists of a similar age. However, I feel that it's entirely due to Marlon's love for the culture and the craft. He's bringing a sound and a message that I feel we don't see enough in rap these days, and I truly appreciate that. My favorite tracks are 2020 Intro, Offbeat, Get Off My Yard, The Working Man, and Looking Up. Be sure to check out this album if you haven't, especially if you're into the more boom bap and jazzy sort of sound. This album handles both aspects of it really well and 100% deserves a listen. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of this album and what your favorite tracks are. Also remember to like and subscribe if you want to see more content and reviews like this one. Thank you for watching, and please stay safe out there.